I want to introduce a book to you. And this really I just feel like changed my life. And I don't use those words lightly. So it's called The Surrender Experiment. And essentially, it's a story of how a meditating, young man who likes to practice yoga, a meditating yogi, moved out to the woods, had a little hut there, and spent all his day meditating. And that's all he wanted to do. But these things and these opportunities kept presenting themselves. And as he surrendered to those opportunities, an amazing adventure unfolded. And it's a true story where he ended up owning and being a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar software company, as well as um, having a lot of land and a compound with different houses where it's a retreat center where different people can come and meditate, and spiritual leaders ended up coming there and hosting events. So all these things happen that I think is pretty cool and I resonate with. I'm like, okay, you're building an impactful software business that's innovative. Like, okay, I'm in. And this is all by going with the flow of life rather than, forcing it out, strategizing it out, because he didn't even want that. So it's a story. I thought it was going to be a principles book, like do this, do that. It's not that. It's a total story. Like it just one event after another that happened in his life. So it's so incredible for me, continuing this conversation that I've mentioned in previous webinars of the art of forcing nothing, the art of forcing nothing. So how can we flow with life rather than carving out our own way? And so in this conference, I totally recommend this. I listened to it on Audible. I loved it. It's the author reading it. It's fantastic. And the whole concept is surrendering to what life is presenting in front of you. And so one of the play on words that I've been playing with is the topic of this week, which is opening to life. And I think that, I come from the very far on the force spectrum, I'd say. So I think maybe meet me in the middle is like opening to life. And at first I had thought, oh, okay, surrender, to life. And then I thought embrace life, because there's certain times where things didn't go the way that he thought it would, or it really made him uncomfortable, but then it ended up being something that was serendipitous and you couldn't even plan how good that was. And I think we've all had many times like that where, it didn't seem like it was good in the beginning, but then ended up being better than we could have ever imagined. So the idea here is, instead of just always looking in hindsight with that, what if we could know that while we're going through it? So I played around with embracing life, like opening up arms. And I did that for a little bit, a few days, and then I'm like, okay, it still feels like I'm trying to force. At least I have some control of I can embrace, I can squeeze. And all this is just ways of controlling things. And it's like, okay, well, why do I need to control these things? Well, it's the fear, the belief, like if I don't, then I'm gonna lose it all, or it's not gonna happen. Got to make it happen for things to happen. Well, that's not really how nature just naturally happens. So what's been resonating with me more is opening to life. Okay, something didn't go the way I thought it would, or it's taking longer than I initially planned it would, or something changed. Okay, like standing with my hands out, how can I open to this? And so I was talking with a friend of mine, Tim Wolf, and we were talking about maybe it's this spectrum of, on one side, doing. That's where I come from, as the land of just doing, constantly doing. And if you're not doing with your hands, you're doing with your mind. And this was how the author got everything I would ever want from doing the opposite, surrendering to it. So to me, it almost feels like there's doing and non-doing. And maybe doing is total, stereotypical hustle and grind culture, never stop, you can sleep when you're dead. On the other side is, say, the non-doing of just piecing out from society, detaching from society, going to the mountaintop, and you're just meditate all day. Somehow you have a little bit of food, somebody brings some food because they feel bad for you, you're just non-doing in the world at all. And so perhaps it's a spectrum. That's really what I've been thinking about with friends, family, colleagues of the spectrum. And finding the sweet spot in the middle. And for different areas of our life, we might be on one side or the other. And what it might require us to do is to open. Maybe we're open to either doing more of the doing, certain things, or open to doing less. And I think these are equally as uncomfortable for the person who happens to be on either side. So really finding the sweet spot of being in the flow of that doing and non-doing. That's ultimately, we think of sports or musicians or you're creating your work. It's like it is that sweet spot of you're doing something, but you're also not doing as well because you're not forcing, you're not planning, you're not. It's moving through you, moving through us. So, and it seems too like it could be different areas of our life, health, wealth, happiness. Maybe we're on different sides of the spectrum for each of those, and maybe we need to open to less doing or more doing. And what does that look like? It's kind of like where are we getting the nudges from the universe, the higher power? Where are we getting, people asking us for certain things, or us getting an internal nudge to that, or our plans not quite going the way that we had. These are all opportunities, I feel like, to open to life with this philosophy. And it's like the river is trying to guide us somewhere, but I was like, no, but I had this plan, and the river's like, trust me, it's going to go faster, better, you're going to have more fun, and it's going to be great. You just got to weave around this obstacle that you're charging head first into with your tightly gripped plans. So, yeah, I think for yourself too is like you can think about what does your life need right now opening to? Is there anything this week that maybe didn't go according to plan that you can open to? Say, okay, what don't I want to feel about this? What is this maybe having an opportunity to? How can I face this, open to it, and flow with it? And one of the things that came up in our conversation with Christy here is the triangle here of, still for me is feeling a little resistance of like, okay, on one side, say there's a spectrum here again, and over on the left it's being a hard worker, right? So it's like the art of forcing nothing. I've been talking about this, of like unwinding that hard worker mentality of like grind every day. If you're not doing that, then you're losing. And on the other side is like, why? Because you don't want to be a lazy worker, like the cardinal sin. You don't want to be lazy, good for nothing, deadbeat, worthless. And so as we were talking, it's like, okay, why does it have like that? Doesn't really make sense why it's just one or the other, because a person can be working, like you shared in the analogy, you can be working hard, shoveling something that needs to be shoveled, but you're doing it with like a broken shovel, and then there's like some other shovels over there. So like, yes, you're working hard and you're moving, you're doing it all day, but it's like the productivity ultimately wasn't what it could be. You just stopped for a minute, looked out, and then or gathered some help. So the thing that we talked about is like, okay, the point that's higher than each is the productive worker. Productive worker. Because the truth is that many people don't want to talk about is that sometimes the lazy worker is way more productive than the hard worker. Because they're like, okay, I don't want to do anything. What's like the one thing that's going to make the most impact for me to get this done? And the interesting thing is that in my experience, a lot of entrepreneurs are like C students. That's what I saw really early on. And it's like, what's a C? A C is like just enough to get like the grade, passing grade. I mean, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of time in business, the people that We're the A students have a tough time with, what do they have a tough time? Perfectionists. They want to get everything perfect. They want to get the A grade before it ships out. And that's just a recipe for disaster in business because it's never going to be perfect. It's an easy way to prolong collecting cash. And the rejection too. They have a harder time with rejection. Um, so yeah, that's an interesting thing. I have seen that too, where like say lazy workers, like they get the best results sometimes, in certain arrangements because they're just like, well, I only want to work on this an hour. So like, how could this result happen in an hour? And then boom, they get one something. Whereas the hard worker is like, all right, I'm putting, 8, 10, 12 hours today on this. And they do. So, and at the same time, we all know someone who's like lazy that you feel like they didn't pull their weight on the team, and it's like, come on, you're not putting it in. So either side has its drawbacks, of course. So we talked about as the productive worker being the higher point in this. And I feel like the productive worker blends both, and it's not just in the middle, but it's higher above. Because the productive worker knows that, hey, if we need to take a day off today, that will overall make things more productive. Let's do that. Hard worker would be like, oh, you're being lazy. You just need to keep grinding. But if we looked at the results, it's like, okay, you can say what you want, but the productive worker ends up getting more of the results. So that trifecta is what I've been keeping in mind, and then bringing it back to the productive worker. Let's see here. The productive worker is right here in the middle. And then say usually the hard worker is there, always doing, always thinking, always planning, always acting, always scheming, always connecting. Usually seen as the non-doing is the lazy. Right here, if we care about the results, that's where we want to be. If we want to just, seek recognition, like I've been in this pattern before, I didn't even realize it, until I did. Which then I was like, whoa, which is, a lot of times I was just working hard out of recognition. Like, oh, well, I'm going to get praise for being the hard worker. I'm going to get praise for like going through all the hero's journey. And then I finally made it out. So it's like, that's just a self-esteem issue. That's just trying to feel better about myself through outside doing. And not even in an efficient way. I mean, you could even get self-esteem with like the results, but it's just self-esteem with like, did you put in the work? Yeah. And so it's like, okay, well, am I starting a business to get more self-esteem, or am I starting it to get the result? If it's the result, then it's like, who the fuck cares about that? And let's just get to the result and have more free time. Because a reframe for me recently has been the more free time that I have getting the result, the more we can laugh. Because when we got free time, there's space for jokes, space for fun. When there's grinding and hustle and everything's stressed out, there's not much space for laughing. So bringing this all together, that is the topic of this week, opening to life. And on the spectrum of doing and non-doing, how we can, calibrate to be in the sweet spot, which ends up being the productive worker, where it's the bringing the best of both worlds of, focused exertion, as well as the practice of non-doing, which literally is the philosophy called Wu Wei that I've mentioned in previous webinars, the art of doing nothing, or the art of non-doing. That's a different translation I've found, is the art of non-doing, which is a little bit different to me. I kind of resonate with that more because it's just like, hey, there's times where it takes discipline to not do anything, because if we do anything, if we're going to do things, we might feel good about it, but we're going to fuck things up. Like that's the ancient philosophy of like, if things are going in this direction, let it go that direction and then work with it.